so the next thing we're going to look at here is a little bit of red blood cell development. This again showing you some of the differentiation pathways. Again, when we're talking about uh, the actual erythrocytes, we're looking more at this upper path here, and you can see at certain stages they do have nuclei. It's only in that finished stage that they lose this. So this process is erythropoiesis, and again, we're making these all the time in the red bone marrow. Again, continue replacing these cells that are going to wear out. Again, starts with that myeloid cell line, goes through a number of kind of precursor cells before it gets to that final erythrocyte. And again, I'm not worried that you know all the stages in this one, just knowing that it goes through a differentiation process. And really what we get to at the end is the erythrocyte, which is a membrane bag, no nucleus, no mitochondria, filled with hemoglobin. And again, this is somewhat tightly regulated. I'm going to say super tightly regulated, but it's definitely regulated. One of the places we actually will monitor our ability to carry oxygen is actually in the kidneys. The kidneys and some of the blood vessels traveling into the filtering of the kidneys, we are looking at oxygen content in there. And if that oxygen content happens to be a little bit too low in the blood, so if we are having hypoxemia, so low blood, or we're hypoxic, however you want to say it, having low O2 in the blood, we can release a protein called erythropoietin, sometimes shortened to EPO, and this is going to stimulate production of more red bone cells from the bone marrow. So you can see if we have hypoxemia sensed by the liver or kidneys, release EPO, stimulates the bone marrow, we get increased production of the erythrocytes, which is going to increase oxygen transport. And again, this should be inhibited as oxygen levels get high enough. We should inhibit the release of that. This is something that's sometimes used as a performance enhancing drug for a lot of endurance type of events. Mainly because if you can carry more oxygen, you can stay aerobic longer and you can go faster for a longer period of time. So it's part of the reason we see this. So we're going to see EPO in response to low blood oxygen, generally from the kidney, stimulates those myeloid cells to start producing more erythrocytes and increase our blood oxygen levels. And again, we should get the signal a lot of times if we're low oxygen carrying for some particular reason. This could be that you had a bleed and you lost blood. You could be at higher altitude. You could have some type of disease that is limiting your ability to take in oxygen. The other thing this could be is if you're doing more aerobic exercise for periods of time, you're actually decreasing the oxygen levels in your blood because you're consuming more oxygen, which can stimulate you to make actually more red blood cells through that EPO pathway. This is definitely influenced by testosterone. More testosterone is going to stimulate a little bit more EPO, and part of the reason males tend to have a slightly higher erythrocyte count. When we're at higher altitude, there's lower atmospheric pressure, you get less oxygen coming into the bloodstream, and we can try to make up for this by actually releasing EPO and increasing our capacity to take in oxygen. And again, there is a balancing act here. As we get more erythrocytes, this is going to thicken the blood, and we can get cardiovascular issues if the blood gets too thick. But it is kind of this balancing act between getting too thick of a blood as well as being able to carry more oxygen to the tissues. And this is part of the reason that actually abusing this drug can be dangerous. So again, a lot of times in sports, if you use erythropoietin or androgens like testosterone, also they've done giving blood when you're training and then injecting, taking a transfusion on right before your event. That's kind of considered to be blood doping. These are all ways that you can increase your oxygen carry capacity. And like I said, again, in endurance events, this is something that people will definitely do. And again, it's not just having that EPO. We need enough iron. We need enough vitamins in order to make these red blood cells functional. Because of that, you need to be making sure you're having a good diet along with whatever training you're doing if you're trying to increase your endurance. As I've said before, these cells can't repair themselves. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have a lot of these organelles. Because of this, they have a lifespan. It's about 4 months. And what we're going to see is these old erythrocytes are kind of broken down in the spleen and liver and taken back up. We recycle parts of it and dispose of other parts. The globulin proteins and certain membrane proteins are broken down and reused for protein synthesis. The iron components in hemoglobin, and we try to save as much iron as we can. We bind these to storage proteins like ferritin, and we store these a lot of times in the liver and spleen, and then we can then transport them to the bone marrow to make more red blood cells. The heme group minus that iron gets converted into a pigment called biliverdin, which sooner or later through a conversion process gets turned into something called bilirubin. And this is part of what your liver excretes and becomes part of bile, and it's actually a lot of what colors your feces. Some of this is also converted to urobilinogen and is lost through, then sooner or later to urobilin, and can also be excreted by the kidneys. So this is just kind of showing that pathway. Again, the main thing that happens here is these get older. There is narrow areas that are very turbulent in the liver, in the spleen, and the high pressure in there as these cells get older, the membranes get weaker, and what happens is they're trying to squeeze through a little spot and they just burst. We phagocytize, like I said, a lot of that, and then we will then take the globin, convert it back to amino acids. Like I said, that heme group, the iron is reused, and then the other part of the heme group, like I said, is converted through biliverdin to bilirubin to bile into the feces, and that's how we get rid of those waste products. This is also something a lot of times when babies are first born, they have issues with jaundice. Part of the reason for this is a fetus has slightly different types of hemoglobin, so their hemoglobin has a higher affinity of oxygen than the mother, so they will take in oxygen at the placenta. After they're born, we are converting this over, so there's a lot of loss of these red blood cells and conversion to the newer types of hemoglobin. Because of that, something you have to worry about a lot of times. What they'll do is UV light helps to break this down. So they have things that they used to call billy blankets, but it was basically UV light that they'd shine on the skin of these infants to help deal with this increased bilirubin levels in the blood. Because again, too much can be dangerous to a fetus. I mean, not a fetus, to an infant. Disorders with this, if you do not have enough red blood cells, it's one of the ways we can cause anemia, but anemia is this idea of low oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. This could be due to lack of cells, it could be due to lack of iron. Those are all different types of anemia. So insufficient red blood cells, one example, like I said, not enough hemoglobin. Abnormal hemoglobins, things such as sickle cell anemia, thalassemia, are both genetic ways that the hemoglobin is a little bit abnormal, and under certain conditions it can't do its job correctly. These can all be causes of anemia. Just to be clear, iron deficiency is not the definition of anemia. Low oxygen carrying capacity of the blood is. Iron deficiency anemia is one type of many of the anemias. The other disorder we can have is it's a technically kind of a blood cancer, generally not as dangerous as some of the leukemias, but polycythemia. You're overproducing erythrocytes. It can be dangerous if you get your blood getting a little bit too thick. Like I said, it can be a bone cancer, bone marrow cancer in certain cases. It can also be a response to being at high altitude for a period of time. So one of those, again, is a normal response to an atmospheric condition. The other one is actually an abnormal state. So what we're going to do next here is we'll take a look at really what's going on with blood typing and why those are important to us, and then we'll move on to some of the other stuff. So I will see you next time.